sermons follow a pattern. In fact, it's one that I have used all down through the years. You find some father in the scripture, and you rehearse the life of that father, and you look for qualities that said father had, and you emphasize them. We do this at Mother's Day. We go to Proverbs 31 and we talk about the virtuous woman. All these incredible things about that woman who serves as an example, a role model for all moms. And most of the time, we do the same thing with fathers. And there's so many notable examples. But I want to go a little farther than that this year. We're going to be looking at some qualities, not necessarily of one father, but we're going to be talking about how to put these good qualities into practice. So I hope this may be one of the most contemporary Father's Day sermons you've ever heard. Because it's one thing to look at someone like David, pick out those traits about him, Joseph, look at those traits about him. Abraham, you could go on and on and on. But how do we get those traits off of the pages and into our hearts as fathers? So I'm going to give you, and we'll move quickly because I've got 8 points. That's usually twice how many I have. 8 points that tell us how to be a good father. You ready, dads? Listening up? This first one. They're not in any particular order, but I think this one is in a good place. And it may surprise you. First, Dad, love your wife. Love your wife. Now you may think, what's that got to do with Father's Day? I am not my wife's father. They have a name for that, and it's not good. What does that have to do with Father's Day? I think you'll see. You'll see. Becomes a husband and father. He may emulate, he may follow your example. Now, that could be positive or it could be bad. Guys, if your children see you disrespect their mother, you know what, in all probability, and there is a cycle here, it's a proven cycle. There's a good chance that when they become a husband and father, they'll do the exact same thing. The exact same thing. It's almost like they feel, well, that's the norm. That's the way it is. But it goes farther than that. Get this. If your daughter, Dad, if your daughter sees you as being abusive, and that may be something physical, it may be something emotional, it could be a lot of things. If they see that happening, you know what's probably going to happen? And again, it's a proven cycle. That young girl is going to grow up, she's going to get married, she's going to be a wife, and potentially a mother. And she's going to think if her husband is abusing her, she just has to take it because her mama took it all of her life. Paul said this. He says, husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. So, dads, I want to challenge you. Love your wife. As your children are watching you, give them a good example to follow. Number two, second, enjoy your children. Enjoy them. I believe that children are given to us for our enjoyment. Do you know what happens so many times? It's as though as parents feel oftentimes that their children are a burden to them. And in order to enjoy your child, you must be willing to spend time with them. Give them your time. And as a father, among the many ways in which I was not a good father, this was probably right at the top. Not spending enough time with the kids. Working a job, pastoring a church, trying to be a husband. We pass it off. I'm just busy. Your time is one of the most important things that you can give your child. The psalmist said this, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. And if you don't believe that's true, and many of you know someone who fits this, some young couple who have not been able to have children on their own, and they love children so much. They want children. But because of physical issues on the part of the dad or the mom, they're not able to have children. And their heart breaks. Their heart breaks. One of the greatest examples, and I'm not going to get into specifics, but one of the greatest examples of this is seen in the couple that raised our son-in-law. The greatest couples that I've ever known. Enjoy your children. They're a blessing, not a burden. Third, provide for your children. Makes sense. Provide for them. Even unsaved people, if they're any kind of parent whatsoever, they provide for their children. They look out for them. They see that whatever the necessity is in their life, that they meet it. I don't think you can be a good father without providing for your child. Paul's writing to Timothy, and he said this: if anyone does not provide for his own, especially for those of his household, children, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Now, I'm not suggesting that you give them everything they want. If you're going down that path, you're in trouble, because you will never be able to give them every single thing they want. What it does mean is those things they need. And it could be something financial, or it could be, as I said a moment ago, spending time with them. You do everything within your power to see that they get what they need. Fourth, and this is so important, listen. Listen to your children. Give your children their undivided attention. Now, let me tell you what undivided attention means. It means when you're talking to them, you don't have one eye on the TV and one eye on them. It means that you are focused on them. And they'll know. They will know if they really have your attention or if you don't. When they have a problem, you know what your child needs? They need a friend. They need, and it's important that we let that friend be us as parents in general, but this is Father's Day. That it's so important that your child considers you a friend. Because when they're little, when they're small, their problems are small. Don't write them off as unimportant. Listen to them. Talk to them. When they get older, the problems get bigger. And you know what? If we have not built that relationship with them as small children, to where that child knows I can go and talk to Dad. If that isn't there, if that didn't start when they were small and was not cultivated, it'll not work when they get older and when their problems get bigger. Listen to your children. Number 5, train your children. Train. I spoke from this not too long ago, and I talked about the fact that so many people quote this verse from Proverbs: teach your children the way they should go, and when they get old, they'll not depart. But it doesn't say that. Teaching has to do with the intellect. Now, any parents that is worth any reconciliation or recognition as a parent will say it's important to see that your children are educated to the best degree that they can. That's important. They're going to need that. That's the intellect, that's the mind. You know what training is? Training is preparing them for life. Because there's a life out there, if God grants, there's a life out there that's big. And they're little, stepping out into a big world. And with a big world comes big situations and big problems. That's where the training comes in as being so important. Train them. teach them the ways of life. Tell them of things that you've had to deal with. And when you made a decision and it didn't work, let them know. You're not perfect. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Let them know, I tried this. It didn't work. Give them the very best counsel that you can give them. Train them. Let me say one other thing about training. Don't be afraid to set boundaries around your children. I talked about this when we went over this verse previously in another message. If you set boundaries around your children and say, okay, I trust you, you're a good child, but there is a line here, and you are not to go over that line. You must operate within those boundaries. You know what your child will probably tell you? I don't want boundaries. I don't want that. They do, believe me. And I used this illustration before, and I'll use it again. If your child has a friend whose parents are very strict on them, they're good parents, but they don't allow them outside of those boundaries. And your child goes home with that friend and sees that situation and picks up on the fact that we can't go outside of those boundaries. You know what subconsciously is going to happen? Your child is going to come back home. They have more freedom. The boundary is not as confined. You know what's going to happen? They're going to get to feeling, evidently, my parents don't love me as much as my friends' parents love them, because they don't let them go to a nightclub. They don't let them drink things that they shouldn't drink. They put boundaries on them. Evidently, my parents don't love me as much as my friends' parents love them. You say that won't happen. It happens all the time. It really does. Train your children. Paul said this, fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. First part of that verse is intriguing. Have you ever known a father and a son who just are always trying to push each other's button? You know, that button I'm talking about. Trying to get jabs at each other all the time. And it almost comes down to a duel. And I think that's what Paul's talking about when he says, fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath. Don't purposely make your children angry. It happens all the time. Number 6, so important. Pray for your children. Pray for them. Listen to what I'm about to tell you. You can't be with your children all the time. It's impossible. They're going to grow up. You'll not be able to keep them sheltered within 4 walls that you have built. Because there's a big world that's someplace they're going to have to go out into. So you're not going to be able to be with them always. But God can. God can. You can't protect them everywhere they go. And there are so many dangers out there. God can. You can't make them choose right over wrong, even though you taught them. But God can. Just reminding them of how they were raised. Pray for your children. Number 7, be a good example. Be a good example. Dad, I want you to know something. You are a role model to your children. I mentioned this on Mother's Day. Moms have this incredible place in the lives of their children that I'm going to be honest with you, dads cannot feel. Sometimes there are situations where they have to try to do both. Those are exceptions. And I am grateful for those dads who take that on and say, the most important thing to me is my child. I will do everything that I can. And I do think oftentimes when those situations come up, God will bring someone into that child's life to give them that wonderful motherly blessing. I thank God in heaven for those that He has gifted to be able to do that. But there's things that mom does that's maternal. Dad, the same thing is true for you. You have inherited some of your father's characteristics. I know for sure I have. And your children will be inheriting a lot of your characteristics as well. They really will. That's why it's so important that whatever is coming in our life, that it's positive, that it's good. Be a good example. Let me give you one more. Number 8. This is important. And all the kids are going to go, yes. Don't expect perfect children. Don't. Don't expect perfect children. You know why? Because there is no such thing as a perfect child. There really isn't. You know why? I do. Because there's no such thing as perfect parents. That's why. Your children are not going to be perfect, Dad, because you're not perfect. And don't expect your children to be this state of perfection. Don't expect that child to be a perfect athlete. I think so many dads sometimes are living in this fantasy world where they want their child to be what they could not be as far as an athlete is concerned. And they get so frustrated because they strike out, because they miss a shot, and the game is hinging on it. And they become so disillusioned. Don't expect your child to be a perfect athlete. They won't. Don't expect your child to be an intellectual genius. We want our children, grandchildren, to excel. And we challenge them. We should do that. To be the very best that they can be. Because there's this huge world out there that's so demanding. They need everything on their side that they can get, intellectually and in every other way. But don't expect them to bring home straight A's. I've been out of school so long, I don't even know if they grade like that anymore. But You know what I'm talking about. Don't expect that. Some will. Others will be like Bob and I. There'll be a lot that won't. There'll be a lot of that get by. And there's several reasons for that. Sometimes it's not a lack of intellect, it's a lack of desire. It's laziness. But know your child well enough to know how much you can push them to excel and be the very best they can be. Don't push them to the extent that it begins to affect their life. I have known situations where parents put so much pressure on their children to be perfect as far as academics are concerned, and that child basically had a nervous breakdown. I have known it for years. Every child is not going to be able to live up to the expectancy of the parent. It's not going to happen. And it goes back to what we said a moment ago. Challenge them to be the best that they can. And when you are certain that they are doing their best, pat them on the head. A good job, buddy. Proud of you. Maybe we need to just work in this area a little harder, but I'm proud of you. That's the way we do it. I hope this morning, rather than just doing the norm, that we as dads have learned some things. And a lot of these things will cross right over to moms as well. But it's Father's Day. To say, Ronnie, my children are up and grown and they have children of their own and beyond. That means that in all probability, you could have even a more extensive role in their life. Because there are things that you can teach your grandchildren, great grandchildren, they can learn from what you have gone through in life. Don't expect them to be perfect. Let's bow in prayer.